If you're looking for a home mortgage, look no further than Premise Mortgage. The Premise process is simpler, faster, and more convenient than the competition because of their cutting-edge technology. Plus, Premise is an independent company, yet is backed by a bank. Therefore, they can offer all kinds of products for clients with various needs and deliver an awesome customer experience. Premise Mortgage is licensed in 43 states and counting. Contact Richie Love today at 704-607-1497. That's 704-607-1497.
Matt Doherty, the 6'7" sophomore from East Meadow, New York.
Leadership is learned.
A starter on Coach Dean Smith's legendary 1982 Tar Heels National Championship team with Michael Jordan.
Jordan comes down with a rebound. Clears it away to Doherty. Doherty going in against Floyd. For the layup, it's good.
Leadership is earned.
Head coach at the University of North Carolina and the University of Notre Dame.
You notice Matt Doherty, he is up working every second of this ball game.
Leadership is taught.
Public speaker, author, and executive coach.
And leadership does not require a title.
This is the Rebound Podcast with Coach Matt Doherty.
I'm really excited for you all to listen to this interview with my next guest, JP Ricciardi. My relationship with JP goes back over 20 years. I met JP when I was the head coach at Notre Dame, and he was a scout for the Oakland A's, but also coached high school basketball and had a player named Neil Finkelton who was 7'6" out of England and was playing for him in Massachusetts. So JP went from working with Billy Beane, who was behind the book and movie Moneyball, to serving as the general manager for 9 years for the Toronto Blue Jays. And then his career at Toronto was terminated in 2009. So we discussed a lot of things like managing change. How do you manage change, especially the first 90 days on the job? We talked about lessons in dealing with post-termination and whether that's sometimes we choose to terminate our positions in terms of retirement or just pivoting, or sometimes you get fired. And what's that like? And then the isolation relief of a CEO, person who's the top of the org chart. It's lonely at the top. And how do you find isolation relief? And JP goes into some good depth there. But I think the biggest takeaways for me were the focus on his faith. JP grew up Catholic, but became a Christian after he started playing in the minor leagues. So the focus on faith, family, and friendships. Because at the end of the day, when you look back on your career, what do you want to be remembered for? And those relationships really are very important to JP and should be important to each and every one of us. Thank you for taking a listen. JP, man, it's good to have you on the show. When I think of you and I see your face, I smile. I remember first meeting you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I was the head coach at Notre Dame, and I think you were scouting for the A's, and you were in town, and you came by the basketball office, and that was, I think, 1999, maybe 2000. Is that a good, accurate recollection?
It's pretty much about the area. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it happened. Yeah.
You were coaching high school basketball, and you were coaching a very unique player, Neil Finkelton, who was 7'6". And as a result, we started recruiting Neil because you came by the office that day. Tell us a little bit about your experience coaching high school basketball and a 7'6" player from England.
Well, when you're a 5'9" point guard, it's pretty hard to coach a 7'6" guy. So we were looking for all the help we could get. But Neil was a really unique kid, interesting situation. I mean, he came to us just through a connection that he wanted to come over to the United States and play. And we actually it was just a good situation. We had a place for him to live. We had the opportunity for him to play. But he really knew very little about basketball. And some of my friends used to say the poor kid was cursed by height. But
yeah,
we tried to make him a basketball player, and he worked as hard as he could. So that was really a good situation. But probably just backing up on that, we had a really good program, so it was a good place for Neil to come to, and it was a good environment. There were good kids, and so that situation worked out really good. And as you said, I was scouting for the A's at the time, so every time I used to go into college campuses, I tried to run over and meet the basketball guys. Some guys wouldn't even give you the time of day, but some guys were great. And obviously, you guys were great, Doug and yourself, and everybody at Notre Dame was really, really good. And, as a result, we've become friends through the years.
Yep.
And I remember Lute Olson, he couldn't see me, but he wrote me a really nice note. I mean, just a really classy guy. And, man, I became an Arizona fan after that, just to root for the good guys. And like I said, some guys wouldn't. I felt like a salesman, Some guys would kick you out, and some guys would say, "Yeah, come on in." But it was fun, and as you know, coaching it's all about the people you work with. And we had great kids at Holy Name High School in Worcester, Mass, and good coaching staff, and it was a lot of fun. And I tell my wife to this day, if I could have kept doing that and provided the income that the other stuff allowed me to do, I would have done it in a minute.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I understand. That's great. No, and thank you for always your willingness to take my call. You were with the A's at the time, so you grew up in Massachusetts, and you played baseball. Your dad was a great baseball player. So talk to us about growing up in Massachusetts with a father that was a big name player, and that influence on you, and kind of how that drove you to become the person you are, the man you are, and also, the profession you chose, and that's Major League Baseball.
I think we are all a byproduct of our environment. I think if you trace everybody back, whether success or failure, I think a lot of it stems from the people you're exposed to at a young age and what the opportunities they either present you with or don't present you with. And I was very blessed. I had a dad who was a blue-collar guy and played minor league baseball and was a very good high school baseball player, and was, well known in the city of Worcester. And because of him, we met so many people. We became very good friends with D. Rowe, who was the old basketball coach at the University of Connecticut. And D. Rowe had hired Dave Gavitt. And, Dave Gavitt had hired a guy named Bill Livesey, who went on to coach and run the Yankee organization. So we were exposed to sports people our whole life. And that's what affected us. My brother and I, we always wanted to try to carve out a career somehow, obviously, first of all, playing, and then from playing, leading into whatever it led to. So we were very blessed that we grew up in the way we grew up, and we were always around athletes. We were always around coaches, and that's what we wanted to be. And so, like yourself, your playing career takes you to a certain point, and then you go from there. So I always felt like we really had a great childhood because we grew up around sports the whole time, and so many great athletes. We were able to. I saw Ernie DiGregorio when I was 10 years old play at St. Thomas Aquinas against Worcester Academy, and so I remember seeing all these guys at a young age, and then saying, "This is what I want to do."
Yeah, Ernie D was one of the best passing guards, and maybe the history of basketball at Providence, and then Buffalo Braves. Oh gosh, yeah. So as a young, that 6th, 7th, 8th grade window, that junior high window is really, I think, an impactful age. What were your dreams? Like, who did you want to be? If you could, was it a baseball player, a certain player that was your hero? Who was your hero at that age?
I really, my whole life, I wanted to be a baseball player. I loved basketball. I loved playing basketball, but I loved baseball even more. Tony Conigliaro was my favorite player in 1967. He had a great year. Fastest guy to 100 home runs, age-wise. 67, he got hit in the eye by Jack Hamilton. And I remember I think I was 9 years old. And I remember being devastated because Tony's Red Sox were in the pennant race. The Red Sox were really making a push. And Tony C was such a great player for them. And he got hit in the eye that night. And I'll never forget, and you can go back and look at it, Sports Illustrated had a cover photo of him with a black eye. I've never seen anything so purple. And I was like devastated. Like this was my guy, and he's gone. And he ended up missing, a lot of time. He did come back. He played with basically 1.5 eye vision and still hit 25 home runs. I mean, he was such a talented guy, and he was a Massachusetts kid. So he was my favorite player. And when he got hurt, I was like, you don't think your heroes are going to get hurt. And I was like, wow, what happened? So I really like Tony Cagliaro as a young player.
Yeah, no, that you had a lot to choose from being in Massachusetts with, I know you're a Bruin, Red Sox and Celtic fan, and has great teams and great players, Bobby Orr to Larry Bird to, Dave Cowens, John Havlicek.
Havlicek was my favorite. I loved Havlicek. He was the best. And I remember I met him at a Red Sox game. I was scouting, and he was actually sitting behind home plate. And what I liked more about John Havlicek was once I met him, he was such a classy guy and such a nice guy. That kind of like just put it over the top for me.
Yeah. Sometimes you're not supposed to meet your heroes, right? Because you can be disappointed.
I think the way your career has gone and the way my career has gone, because we've been exposed to so much, I think you kind of realize that maybe a little earlier than some of the other people. And I always tell people the same thing. I remember for my wife's 40th birthday, we're big Springsteen fans, and she's over the top. And she was playing in Toronto, and through a couple of connections I had, we got backstage. And first thing I told her, I said, listen, don't be disappointed if he's not a great guy. I said, I hope he is. And he could not have been nicer. So
really,
I was happy for my wife. But I agree with you. You're always holding your breath.
Yeah. And, it just makes you realize, you're a public figure. You've been a public figure, as a GM of the Toronto Blue Jays. I was a public figure, I'm, in certain circles, right? You walk into one room and you're known, you walk into another room and you're not known, and navigating that is always very interesting. But when you're the GM of the Toronto Blue Jays, anywhere you go in Toronto, people know who you are. And you think about like, okay, I could be having a bad day. There's a big trade looming, or we're on a losing streak. And the hostess comes up, greets you, takes you to table, and you don't give her the time of day because you're just preoccupied. And then they form that opinion and take it to the masses, like, hey, JP Ricciardi, he didn't even say hello. He didn't tip me when I got my car, when he got his car, whatever it might be. And those things go a long way. And so, being cognizant of that, I think is important when you're in that CEO chair. And so on this show, I like to talk about leadership and dealing with failure, dealing with setbacks, dealing with adversity. So you had to walk away from baseball as a player. What was that day like when you kind of knew it was over?
Great question. I tell people this all the time, and it didn't really hit me until probably like 20 years after I was done playing. I remember telling my wife, I said, from the time I was 6 years old, my first words were catch. So from the time I was 6 years old till the time I got released as a minor league professional baseball player, my whole life was trying to be the best baseball player I could be. Like you, the hours you probably spent that no one saw you taking jump shots or running sprints or whatever you were doing that no one sees. Every day I woke up, my goal was, how do I make myself the best baseball player I could be? And I go work out with my friends. I, just sacrifice so much. And then all of a sudden it's gone. No one prepares you for that. No. Now I'm 64 years old, so I'm a little older than you, but not by much. There was no life coaches. my dad was from the school of, okay, pick yourself up, let's go.
Right.
You got to go find something else. It was more of a tough love environment. Yep. So no one prepares you for that. Today, there's a safety net for a lot of people who fail. But in my situation, and in a lot of people, there wasn't that safety net. And you kind of got hit between the eyes like, okay, today I don't get up and work out. What do I do? Mm-hmm. So that was a really big shot of reality hitting you right between the eyes. And, for me personally, I knew I loved the game and I knew I wanted to stay in the game. And I just kind of turned everything over to coaching and scouting. And that took a little bit of time because you always have that player in you. Mm-hmm. It takes a long time to get it out of you. And I even know, and you've probably run into this too, even when you're scouting, you see yourself in a player or you see something about a player and you say, well, he should be able to do this. Why can't he do this? Or right. I could do this better than he could do this. And it takes a while to get that mentality out. But once you get that out, you become a pretty good evaluator.
Yeah. I love the transition here. Scouting, and you end up with Billy Beane and the Oakland A's. You played with Billy in the minor leagues. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you had a relationship with him, and he is best known for the book and movie Moneyball. And so talk about this. I think a lot of times when you rebound, people worry like, okay, I'm a baseball player. What can I do now? I'm a scout. What can I do now? I'm a basketball coach. What can I do now? Many of the skills are transferable. And I think that, the work ethic, the grit, the toughness, the preparation, the communication, the evaluation, there's a lot of skills that transferred. What skills transferred from your playing days to your scouting days?
Good question. I think when you do something with so much passion and you love it so much, you now find a way to transfer it. And this is one thing I think a lot of guys struggle with as coaches. Once you move into that area of not playing anymore, it's not about you anymore. And you have to find a way to say, how can I help someone else get better? And I think once you accept that and you realize I have a lot to offer, I just now have to learn how to connect with this kid or with this other staff worker, or this guy's struggling, coming off a pick. This mm-hmm. guy's struggling hitting a slider. This guy's struggling getting to the park on time. This guy's struggling organizing his area. I think once you start becoming like, okay, I've done all this stuff self-motivated, I can help other people. And I think it just becomes, you become selfless and you think of other ways to help people. And I think that's what makes good coaches. And I think that's what makes good leaders or good instructors is they put themselves aside and draw from their experiences. I talked to a great guy the other day, Bill Livesey. I don't know if you know him or not, but Bill ran the Yankees. Bill ran the Yankees for a long time. He was responsible for drafting Jeter and Posada and that whole crew, Andy Pettit. And he was saying something. He goes, when you're 25 years old, you have thoughts, you have opinions, but you have no history. So none of the things you've done have been tested. So it's important at a young age to be a really good listener because you could be convicted, but you don't have any history with your convictions. And, it was interesting. And yes. I think as we mature, we get that experience and we learn how better to put our history and our experiences out there. So I think you have one mentality as a player, you have to transfer that over whatever area you go to, even in business.
Business is a contact sport. So when I became an executive coach, some people would say, well, what do you know about running a business? And I'm like, let me ask you a question. I was the head coach at North Carolina. and Notre Dame, two of the biggest brands in the world. I had a multi-million-dollar budget. I had to attract talent, train talent, discipline talent, hold them accountable. I had a board of directors. I had to deal with the media. I had a profit and loss statement, which was basically my one loss record. And then they start nodding. They're like, oh, okay, I get it. And so, but when you touch on going from a player to a scout, then you go to a GM, a friend of mine, Dr. Jerry Bell, talked about the success pyramid. And so it's like 3 layers. You go from entry level, where you are known for your technical ability, like as a player or maybe as your first year scout. But then you go into management. So now you got to manage the scouts. You got to manage the players. And then you go to the C-suite or the CEO or the GM, where you're the top of the pyramid. And all you're doing is leveraging talent below you. I like to inverse the org chart, where you're at the bottom and you're supporting your middle managers who are supporting your frontline workers, which in your case are the players. So it goes from knowing the technical skills to managing people. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, right? They got to learn to delegate. They got to learn to trust. I think CEOs, GMs are empowered with 3 things: casting your vision, driving culture, and engaging in large business transactions. So as you grew from the A's to all of a sudden in 2001, you become the GM of the Toronto Blue Jays. You're handed the keys to that Porsche, and, drive it as fast as you can. Just don't wreck it. Right. What was that transition like, and where were the areas where you kind of struggled?
What I would tell anybody is, first of all, never forget who you are and where you're from. You were raised a certain way. And now when you become a leader, that shouldn't change who you are. You should still treat the lowest person who works for you, whether it's the clubhouse guy or it's the traveling secretary, whoever it is, you should still treat them with respect and kindness. And what we always tried to do is just create an environment of friendliness, of showing people that they care, that they matter. And like I said, I grew up with a sports background. So for me, I used to love going down to the clubhouse guys and talking to them. And you would get so much information about the players. Hey, so-and-so's not that great a guy. Hey, we talked to so-and-so on another team. You would get a lot of information, but I think leadership is a very, very lonely job, because no one walks in and says to you, hey, how you doing today? How's it going? How's your day going? They always present you with, here's all the problems that are happening right now, and you got to solve them. And I mean, it's very, very seldom that someone would come into you and say, how you doing? How's everything going? And I used to tell my assistant, Alex Anthopoulos, who's the GM of the Braves now, and he's done a great job. And I used to tell him all the time, Alex, leadership is lonely, so you better be careful if you're going to get up there, because everybody's going to want you to solve the problems of the day. And sometimes you can't solve the problems of the day.
Well,
but I think
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No. I think leadership comes down to you taking the initiative to care about other people and actually care about them, to find out what their family is like, to find out that, their son might be struggling a little bit here. Their daughter might have happened to them. And it doesn't, you don't have to be St. Francis, but you can just show people that you have some empathy and you actually care about them.
Right. Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. I wrote down, it's a lonely job. In my coaching practice, Vistage coaching, it's executive coaching. And one of the key components is what you just touched on. We talk about isolation relief. How can a leader find relief from the isolation that is being the CEO, the top of the org chart? and they need some peers. You need a personal board of directors. A friend of mine coined that phrase. So who was on your personal board of directors that you could go to and be vulnerable and know it wouldn't be weaponized against you? Was it somebody inside the organization, somebody outside the organization, somebody outside of baseball?
Yeah, you're asking questions from a man with experience.
Yeah, I'm not that 25-year-old anymore. I've got a history.
It's so. Once again, not to go back to Alex, but I remember telling Alex that you have to have. Sometimes after a tough loss, I'd say, "Come on, Alex, let's go have a coffee," And sometimes he would just kind of blow me off, and say, "I'm going to go home, see my girlfriend, this and that." And I'd say, "Okay, no problem." And then when he became a GM, he called me up and he said, those times you used to say, "Let's go get something to eat. Let's go do this." He goes, "Now I know why you wanted to do that." And I think you have to find a group. For me, I have a strong faith. I pray a lot. I find a lot of comfort in that. My wife, Diane, for 40 years has been the greatest listener with some of the greatest advice. Sometimes I used to tell people that sometimes my friends I grew up with who played high school baseball and college baseball would say to me, "Why the hell are you guys doing this?" And I would sit there and go, "You know what? You guys are right." And so sometimes the simplistic answer from someone who's a little bit removed and not as close to it can kind of get you grounded. But that is so important that the people that are in charge have. I think that's why people get in trouble. I think that's why they turn to alcohol. I think that's why they turn to maybe some other stuff. I think the pressure is so great that they don't have someone to rely on and someone to talk to and realize that, what they're going through it's pressure and you have to find a way to release it.
Yeah, it's real. It's real.
Oh, 100%.
So a couple things, on your personal board of directors sits God and Diane. And I think those should be the leadoff batter and the second batter, right? That's awesome that you have that relationship. You've been married over 30 years now, correct?
Be 40 in June. Yeah.
40. Wow.
Yeah.
40. Man, that's the best prospect you ever signed.
Oh yeah. If I went to jail though, I'd be a free man.
Wait, repeat that line. I've not heard that one.
I told my wife, we've been married 40 years, but if I went to jail, I would have been a free man by now.
Wow.
Lovingly.
Yeah, lovingly. This is being recorded, JP, and will be probably delivered to Diane personally by me.
She's heard them all by now.
So tell us about your faith. How you grew up and how do you pray? You say you pray a lot. Some people don't know how to pray. And so tell us about your background. Religious, Catholic, I'm assuming.
Nope. We were raised Catholic, but we've been non-denominational Christians for a long time.
Gotcha.
Became a Christian. Grew up in a heavy, as you did, the Northeast. Very, very Catholic. Obviously, Italian, Irish backgrounds. So the Catholic Church was very big, but didn't really know much about anything else until I played professional baseball, and then got exposed to other people that had different viewpoints, and obviously Christians that I played with. Became a Christian probably in 1980. Would like to say I've had the greatest walk with God, but not all the time. And, your Christianity makes you realize that you are vulnerable and you do sin and that Jesus forgives us and He's our Savior. So my faith has gotten stronger as I've gotten older. Just before I came on with you, I just listened to a couple of my favorite pastors who give me inspiration every day. I read the Bible every day, and I try to start my day off that way. I'd like to tell you that I'm going the way I want to go every day, but It's not a perfect walk.
You're a baseball player. Batting .333 gets you in the Hall of Fame. So if you do it three out of 10 days, you're in good shape. Tell me who you like to listen to.
I never thought of it that way.
Well, listen,
I never thought of it that
way. What are the pastors you like to listen to?
I really like David Jeremiah. Very good. He's out of California. He's excellent. I've just recently come across, and I got to make sure I get his name right. Greg Hamrick, I believe it is.
Gary Hamrick. Gary Hamrick.
I just found him like 2 weeks ago. Outstanding. Really, really good. Lori's good. I kind of bounce around and listen to a lot of different guys.
Yeah.
And
Gary Hamrick, my wife and I started, we're technically members of his church. They're in Leesburg, Virginia. We're in North Carolina. It's about 5 hours away. We've gone up there a year ago with another couple, and we were supposed to go to Israel with Gary Hamrick, and he brings 250 people to Israel. We were supposed to go, and then the war broke out. And so he is a great teacher of the Bible.
Awesome.
And yeah, that's pretty cool. We have, I grew up Catholic. I was an altar boy, and that's all I knew. And then I got exposed to Christianity too. And we go to a non-denominational church in Gary Hamrick, Cornerstone Chapel. There's religion, and then there's Christianity in my mind. So that's really cool that you share that. Thank you for doing that. Diane, what's the best piece of advice she gave you over the years related to being a general manager? Let's put it that way.
It's so funny because both my boys were, one of them is still a baseball player, playing professionally, and my oldest played in college. And the same advice Diane gave them, she always gave me. She said, baseball is something you do. It's not who you are. And I can't thank her enough for always keeping our feet on the ground and realizing that there's so much more. Matt, you know this because you've lived it. You get so caught up in what you're doing that you kind of lose sight. You think that when the team lost 6 games in a row, you think everybody in the world is thinking that your team lost 6 games in a row. And then all of a sudden you talk to one of your friends back home and he goes, yeah, I had to take my kid to the hospital, there's tonsils and this and that. And by the way, how's your team doing? And you're like, wow, that puts it in perspective.
That's right.
So we internalize so much because we're so into it. It's all we know, that we think the whole world is feeling the same stuff we feel. And you have to have someone like a Diane, and I'm sure like your wife, that says, hey, there's life tomorrow,
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, I've been in baseball 43 years. First time I was ever fired was in Toronto after 8 years. And you know what? Life went on.
Yeah.
Life went on.
The struggle I have, and maybe I would imagine you can relate to this. I was praised for being a hard worker, and I had to be a hard worker because I wasn't that talented. So I had to really become obsessed. Now, obsession, right, is not a good thing as a Christian, right? So I was obsessed with being a basketball player and then a basketball coach, and I wanted to be the best. So I identified as I liked when people called me a basketball player. I like when people called me a coach. So I identified that. So when I lost my job, my identity was lost. And then all of a sudden I was trying to find my way in the world, pivoting and rebounding from my failure. It still triggers me sometimes when I see somebody who's making $5 million a year as a basketball coach, and maybe I feel like I'm a better coach than that person is, or somebody doing a game on ESPN. And I'm like, why aren't I doing that game on ESPN? It's hard. That's a hard separation because you wouldn't get to where you were as a player or a GM if you didn't, give it your all. but there is that perspective. And I find it amazing when I see great athletes or great coaches that have a balance. How do you find that balance? How does the CEO who's listening to this podcast find that balance? And really, it can make you better at what you do, as opposed to being so obsessed with being successful.
Who defines failure? That is a question I would ask. What is failure? Is it failure because you see it as failure? Is it failure because society tells you failure? I mean, the great Teddy Roosevelt quote,
That's right.
of being able to get into the ring, which I find, it's funny because when you're in the public eye in certain times, and to this day, you're still in the public eye. People recognize you, people say, but writers would say things or do things. And I told my son the other day, I was talking to him, and we were talking about people that were critical of me in the past or whatever. So I said to my two boys, I said, well, let me ask you this. The things that they said about Daddy, do you think Daddy's any of those things? Have you ever seen Daddy behave like that? And they said, no. I said, well, there you go. That's what matters to me, that you guys don't see me the way someone's writing about me.
Yep.
So, what is failure? How do you look at failure? I look at failure. To me, failure would be like losing World War II.
Right.
That would be failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Us, we've, and I know what you're saying. You look up and you say, geez, how come I'm not doing this, or how come I'm not doing that? But I think God has a plan for us. So we have to understand that. And that's sometimes hard to understand. But I don't know. I think you have to look back at your years at Notre Dame, your years at North Carolina, your years as a player, and you say, geez, I probably did more positive things than I did negative things. And I got to draw from that, because once the games start, they're out of your control. Yep. There's only so much you can do. The ball bounces one way, you don't get a call, this or that. It's the different. I had teams in the American League East with a $53 million payroll. The Red Sox had a $200 million payroll, and the Yankees had a $200 million payroll. How am I going to compete with those guys? And my teams were 500. So for me, we did pretty good with not a lot.
Right.
So you got to kind of keep it in perspective. And I just don't think failure should be defined by other people in your own life. I think that really, I think you have to learn to live with that.
Yeah. And that's where your faith comes in, right?
Has to come in. That's why I don't understand how people survive without having faith.
Yeah.
It's, we're not that important when it really comes down to it.
A friend of mine has written a book. It hasn't come out yet. It's Kill Your Ego. And it basically talks about what you said. You're on a losing streak. You call your buddy, and, he's talking about taking his kid to a hospital. And he says, by the way, how's your team doing? Like, not everybody is talking about you. Not everybody is thinking about you. And perspective is so, 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 so important. A friend of mine, a coaching client, we were talking about this, and comparison games are work of the devil, right? But yet as an athlete and as a GM, you're comparing every day. You're looking at the standings every day. You're looking at stats, data every day. But at some point, the comparison games of, the Yankees have a bigger payroll, that GM has a better job, that player got I'm as good as that player. That's the work of the devil, and be able to shut that off. And he had a great line. He says, we need to compare down. Like, don't compare up, because we're in the top 1% of the world population in terms of probably everything. Compare down, like you talked about, your friends taking his child to the hospital. Compare to that person on the street corner that's begging. We've got a pretty darn good life. And again, relying on your faith. I want to go back to taking over the Blue Jays. Managing change is an art form. I've done it 4 times, and I screwed up royally one time at least. What was it like those first 90 days? We talk about the first 90 days on the job. What did you intentionally do? And maybe what mistakes did you make?
It's so funny because one of the first people I hired was a guy named Dick Scott, who was a dear friend of mine, and he was our farm director. And Dick was great at his job, and he still is. He's managing in AAA for the Mets now. When I went to New York, we were able to bring him to New York. So I've been with Dick a long time. So Dick was my first hire, and I brought him in the office in Toronto. We sat down, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I said, "Okay, now what do we do?" and he started cracking up. He goes, "No kid, now." He goes, "It's such a daunting task." So, I think what we tried to do was surround ourselves with as many people of not so much 100% like mind, but probably had the same work ethic and vision of what we wanted to do. In professional sports, you don't have a lot of time. So unfortunately, you can't spend a lot of time trying to convince the people you've just taken over how you want to do it, because they're so programmed to how they've done it. You spend so much time and effort trying to convince them to win them over that you almost lose sight of what you're trying to do. So I know Parcells one time said a new broom sweeps clean, and I hated to put someone out of work, but we tried to just get as many people. Now, keep in mind, I've been in the game a long time, so I had a lot of connections, and I always knew if I got this job, this guy was going to do this for me, this guy was going to do this. And so I was able to do that. They gave me carte blanche to be able to do that. So I was able to surround myself with as many people that I respected and thought would do a good job. Unfortunately, I had to let people go, and that wasn't a fun thing to do. And once you do that, now all of a sudden, they're on the street telling everybody that you're not a good person and you're this and that. I like to tell people, before I became a GM, I was like one of the most loved guys in baseball. The writers loved me. Everybody loved me. Once I became a GM, I was like, man, all of a sudden I'm the worst guy in the world, because you have to make decisions that people see nationally. So like I go back to, it's a very lonely job being in charge.
There are two kinds of entrepreneurs: those who run their businesses and those whose businesses run them. If you've lost control of your business, consider running on EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. EOS is used by more than 190,000 companies worldwide to help simplify, clarify, and achieve their vision. My friend and colleague, Brandon Blell, is a professional EOS implementer. She can help. Schedule a meeting with her at eosworldwide.com/Brandon-Blell. That's BLELL, or connect with her on LinkedIn. If you are looking for a commercial roofer, you got to call Catamount Roofing first. They are experts in the commercial roofing space, serving North and South Carolina. The team at Catamount specialize in commercial, industrial, medical, and institutional roofing. They will care for your roofing investment every step of the way, from design and installation to maintenance throughout its life, to ensure maximized watertight service. Solutions through perseverance. Catamount Roofing. They work to make your roof last longer. Get in touch today at catamountroofing.us. That's catamountroofing.us. I'm big on, vision, mission statement, core values, and then a list of behaviors. Were your core values, you touched on them earlier, but were they written? Were they talked about? Were they on the walls? Or was it just something that people felt in the organization?
Churchill said, "Well done is better than well said." So I tried to do it by leadership. Mm-hmm. And I tried to do it by being there. And I told my wife that, listen, this is going to take a lot of time. So I'm going to have to be a lot of places doing a lot of things, because I have to put the time in. And that meant spending time with the trainers, spending time on the field, spending time with the players, spending time with agents. You have to get out there and you have to show people that not only are you talking about having a good environment, not only are you talking about creating a good place for people to play, and you're trying to bring people to a whole different country. I mean, players, first thing they think of is, oh my God, I got to go through customs. My wife has to take the kid through You gotta get out there to the players. You got to talk to the players. So it was very time consuming, but I thought the only way to do this is by example. So, and what makes me feel good about today is I still run into so many people that work for us in Toronto, that played for us in Toronto, that coach for us in Toronto, and they still say to this day how they were treated great. They appreciated the honesty. They appreciated the fact that you were there for them. That's the best compliment you can get, because talking about it and doing it are two different things.
I wrote a book called Rebound from Pain to Passion, and there's one chapter on the 6 No's, KNOWS, of leadership, and I came up with a goofy acronym, STEVIT, and STEVIT was a myth out of Eastern Europe, a 7-footer with grades. And the S stands for knowing yourself. The T stands for knowing your team. The E stands for knowing the environment. V for vision, I for industry, T for truth, mining for the truth. When you took over, you got to know the environment, right? What's the politics of the place, of the city, the owner, where are the landmines you've got to avoid or diffuse. It's one thing before you take the job, you think you're asking all the right questions, but then you get the job and there's some surprises. What was the biggest surprise after you took over the Blue Jays?
You touched on a lot of them. No one knows what it's like to run something until you're in the chair. And then all of a sudden the directives come down. The dating's over. Now the rubber hits the road. So I took the job with an $88 million payroll that they immediately told me that they wanted to have down to $50 million. So the only way I could do that was to trade all the good players. And I could get nothing in. So I could get nothing in return, because these teams were taking the contract on. They weren't going to take the contract on and give me a prospect. So I traded Paul Quantrill and Gonzalez and Plesac, and I was able to get the payroll down to like $62 million. And I told him, I said, that's probably as good as we're going to be able to do. But no one told me that when I got the job that the Blue Jays payroll was going to go backwards.
Oh, so you did not know that before you took the job. Oh my gosh.
Nope.
So now what would you tell your old self, what questions? Oh, this is such a big part of it. You could ask the right questions, but you'd always get the right answer. So would you have asked a different question before you took the job?
I probably would have asked them what they projected their payroll to be over the next 5 years. But therein lies the problem. You don't want to be perceived as someone who doesn't want the job either. You like when it's your first job, you think you can conquer the world. Right. So, we were in Oakland and we were making, water out of wine with very, very little talent and doing well with it because we found our niche. Right. What I realized in Toronto was, in Oakland, we didn't have the Yankees and the Red Sox. In Toronto, we had to face the Yankees and the Red Sox, and we had a battle for them. So people aren't coming to Toronto and say, oh, geez, I got to face the Yankees and the Red Sox as a pitcher. So it's just a different dynamic. So I guess I would have probably asked, maybe what your payroll projections were over the next 5 years. But there's also a part of you that says, I'm up for the challenge. And I'll try to do the best that I can with what I have. There's a great line from The Godfather. Hyman Roth says to Michael Corleone, "This is the business we chose." Right. So when you get in these jobs, you sit there and say, "I can't complain because this is the business that we're in." I think some things.
Would you have taken the Toronto Blue Jay job if you knew what the payroll projection was going to be?
Yeah. Yep. Because I turned the job down, and it was 5:30 in the morning the next day. My wife woke me up and she said, "You have to take this job." And I said, "Listen, we just started a family. We just, I'm comfortable." She goes, "If you don't take this job, you're going to regret it the rest of your life."
Wow.
So that's the reason I called him up and said, listen, I talked to my wife. We talked it over. And it was a good time in our life because the boys were 5-3. But I'm so glad I did it in so many ways, because even though we didn't have the success that I wanted to have, now in today's game, I would have made the playoffs 2 or 3 times because we had good enough teams. But the playoffs weren't expanded.
Right.
But I learned so much about myself. I met so many great people. And I was able to help a lot of guys start their careers and go on to do some things. So I have no regrets that way. I mean, in the world of fantasy, I would love to sit here and say, yeah, we rattled off 2 or 3 World Series, but real life isn't fantasy.
So, as a coach, the neat thing is you've been a coach, and Bob McKillop, who you know of, if you don't know him, legendary coach at Davidson College, was my high school coach, and who's also been on this podcast, talks about coaching scars. Those moments where you may have said something or done something that you still stings when you think about it, Do you have any of those coaching scars or leadership scars when you were in the chair in Toronto that you wish you could have back?
Oh, 100%. I think one of the things that I would tell anybody who's in any position of where they're exposed to the media, especially today, you have to choose your words so carefully. And, I like to tell you that I'm a hardcore Northeast guy, and kind of like what you see is what you get. And I don't think the media handles those personalities real well. And I had some run-ins with the media because I didn't want them to ever think like they could just push us around. And I would just be honest with them, and I would tell them. And maybe today I probably wouldn't get that in depth and I would just say, yeah, no, and probably just swallow it a little bit and move on, instead of challenging them when they would question a player or a move or this or that. And even when you've done radio shows and things like that, I would probably be much more guarded. And then you battle with, is it really the real you?
No, I get it. I get it. I've been there.
Yeah.
And so, I've been doing some research. I saw maybe making reference to Adam Dunn, where you said something publicly and that kind of backfired, maybe backfired.
Yeah. And honestly, what happened was that night we had a brutal loss, and I had to go on the radio. And I went on the radio, and I knew more about Adam Dunn than other people did, and I let my guard down, and I felt bad about it because I really don't know Adam Dunn, and I shouldn't have said what I said, and I felt bad about that, and I put our trainers in a bad spot. So what I learned from that was, don't go anywhere when you're a little ticked off.
So that's where we need to. And Adam Dunn was a player that people were talking you should have traded for or picked up or something like that.
Right.
Right.
I mean, we didn't have the resources to get Adam Dunn or anything like that. But I made a comment about, he wasn't. I didn't think he loved baseball that much, and he wasn't a hard worker and this and that. And I should have never said it. But I did, and then you can almost feel those words going on, and you want to go like,
yeah.
That,
so how do you, because those are the coaching scars, right? Those are the scars. A leader does that in a conference room. You did it in front of the national media, but a leader does that in a conference room in front of their senior leadership team, and it's scarring. So how do you protect yourself from yourself? Right. That's the instead of it, that's the S, knowing yourself. And do you have a truth teller, somebody who can put up a stop, like the third base coach? They're going to put up the stop sign. Don't turn the corner. You stop at third, JP. How can you, And that's why I say leadership's a practice, because you don't get to practice those situations. Like in baseball, you practice the squeeze bunt, you practice, all these different drills. But as a leader, you don't practice talking to the media after a tough loss, getting a tough question and having to respond. You don't get reps. So all of a sudden you make a mistake and you step on a landmine.
Yeah. And I think if you show people that you're human, that you have some frailness to you, that you are susceptible to making mistakes, and you tell them right off the bat, I should have never said that. I'm sorry that I said that. It didn't paint me in a good light. It certainly didn't paint the organization in a good light. And I take full responsibility for that. Up to you if you want to forgive me or not, but I'm showing you that I am being honest and I regret what I did. Now there's going to come a day when you do something that you're going to want someone's forgiveness. So maybe the lesson out of this is, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me for something that I did, remember someday you're going to come to someone, might not be me, but someone else, and you're going to want their forgiveness too. So we're all vulnerable. Sometimes we become iron in fire, and sometimes we melt. But I don't think anybody is.
The only person that's perfect that hung on the cross, right? And so the grace, like I've as I've deepened my faith, the word grace continues to pop up. And that's something that is a really powerful word. And, to give grace to others, forgive them, really forgive them, is really empowering. And you know what? The person we need to forgive the most is ourselves. We don't forgive ourselves sometimes. As a competitive athlete, manager, GM, sometimes we hold ourselves to a standard, and it's really ego. And we need to be able to give ourselves grace. What was it like the last day, with Toronto? It was November of 2009.
I knew, probably, I'd been there 8 years, and Paul Beeston, who had taken over, actually wanted me to move. We moved my family. We moved back to Massachusetts, and I would stay in Toronto, come back and forth, because I knew that these jobs have they all have an expiration date. And I didn't want my kids to be 12 and 13 years old in Canada, then have to come back to Massachusetts and kind of get back into, what they were doing. So what we tried to do was keep them here, come up in the summer, do all stuff like that, which we spent a ton of time together. But Paul Beeston actually came to me and offered me a 3-year extension if I would move my family back to Canada. And I just told him at the time I couldn't do it, just because the boys were really starting to get, indoctrinated into where they were, and they were making friends. And, like all of us in this business, you have to decide at some point your family comes first. So I think that didn't bode well. And I think I just knew. You just know. Something's coming down the pike. And so I was prepared for it. But, the first few days, I got let go in Baltimore. And I drove from Baltimore home. And I just wanted to drive. And I actually got 3 phone calls. Kevin Towers, who's passed away now, who was the GM of the Padres, he had gotten let go like 3 or 4 days earlier. And he called, just wanted to see how things were going, this and that. Billy Bean called me right away, who's, one of my dear friends. And then Theo Epstein called me. So I talked to those 3 guys, but it was actually a little cathartic, because I got to just think, but you go through all the things. You go through, why did this happen? What could have been better? What could I have done better? Who do I blame? You go through all of these things. And it really took me about a year to kind of get it out of my system. And I think the best thing to happen to me was I had 1 year left on my contract. and I didn't have to work. I did work at ESPN, which was fun, but I got to coach my kids, and I got to realize that, you know what? No one really cares if I'm doing anything or not. So it was kind of nice that way. So, no one likes to hear bad news, but goes back to how you brought up. You either pick yourself up by your bootstraps or you sit there and you wallow.
You either go through adversity or you hit a wall, and it doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And so what are the things that you touched on a little bit, time with your family? What are the things were the blessings in disguise? And how do you take the good out of it? What are some of the good things that happen by being terminated at Toronto?
Well, you look back and you see the people that you work with that are doing well. You see some of the trades. I mean, I traded for Jose Bautista. No one even knew who he was. I mean, they just put his name up in the Ring of Fame up in Toronto. I was able to take a year off, and then Sandy Alderson, one of my dear friends, got the GM job. It's a funny story because Theo called me up and I said, I'm going to take the year off. So he offered me a job. So I took the job with Theo, and he tells me even to this day, he said, you had the shortest tenure in Red Sox history. One day. I go into Fenway Park. I sign my contract. He says, hey, I want you to sit in on this meeting. So I sit in the meeting. I'm driving home, and he says, I just got a call from Sandy Alderson. He wants permission to talk to you. I said, for what? He said, he just got the GM job with the Mets. So anyway, so Sandy called me up, and I went over to the Mets. So I thanked Theo for the one day. I said, man, you're hard to work for. I said, this is tough. But Theo was great. He was great. And I went over and I took a job with Sandy, and it was nice because Sandy was now coming back to a GM role that he hadn't had in a long time. And he really needed someone like me that just got out of it. And so I was able to help him build the infrastructure, bring people over. So I kind of found a little bit of a purpose again. And we started just, building all over again. And in 2015, we go to the World Series, and the Blue Jays get beat. And the guys on that 2015 team, there was like 7 or 8 of them that I had signed or traded for or whatever. So it would have been nice to have played the Blue Jays. But I didn't feel too bad they didn't make it. So,
that's a tough thing, right? You want them to do well because it's a reflection on you, but you want them to do poorly because they terminated your contract. That's the interesting pickle that you're in. You touched on, and we'll wind this up in the next few minutes, the phone calls. The phone calls you receive after you get let go, and the phone calls you don't receive. Like you're sometimes surprised, like, how come Joe didn't call me? Like, I thought we were boys. Like,
it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And actually, I just left the Giants. I have, my contract ends up in December, but I'm just going to go in a different direction. And I have reached out to certain people, not a lot of people, because I'm still debating whether I want to retire or continue to work. I have a lot to offer and a lot I still want to do, but it has to be in the right situation. And to this day, I am still amazed at how many people don't return a phone call.
Wow.
It's amazing. And I'm telling you, I have helped guys get a lot of jobs, as I'm sure you have. And you can't even get a text back. And there is no excuse in today's day and age for not getting back to, because even if you don't want to talk to someone, all you have to do is text them and say, I can't talk to you, or I don't have anything for you. But getting back to like what we originally talked about, Matt, it's how you're raised. I got a call from a guy the other day I worked with 20 years ago. His son lost his job. I called the guy back right away. I got on the phone for 3 or 4 people I knew, not for me, but for the kid. So it's either in you or it's not in you, but I'm not even amazed anymore. I don't even think twice when someone doesn't call me. I have lost faith in mankind in a lot of ways. I will say that. I just don't understand how someone does not get back to you. It's disrespectful. It's bad manners too.
Yeah, bad manners. How about that? Like that my mother, just a vision of my mother just popped in my head when you said bad manners. Yeah. John F. Kennedy, you like quotes. John F. Kennedy says, victory has many fathers, but defeat is an orphan. Something I may have butchered the quote, but it was amazing to me. People love your position and not the person sometimes. And so your Rolodex, for those of the 60 and older crowd to understand what a Rolodex is, gets cleared out by like 75%, which is kind of freeing. Oh gosh, this is really good. Last question, and you touched on it a little bit, but for those CEOs, people getting into the CEO role, what would you tell your younger self, or what advice would you give that, person who's just getting ready to take over an organization, whether it be in sports or not?
I would tell them that your run and whatever it is going to end at some point. And when it ends, how do you want to look back and be remembered? Do you want to be looked back as someone who was not a good guy to work with, not a good teammate? I mean, for me, the greatest insult I could ever get was not being a good teammate. That would really, really burn me. And I even tell kids that played for me, guys I played with, whatever, once a teammate, always a teammate.
Wow.
And I think when you lose that at the end, when people can look back and say, yeah, I made a lot of money, I did this, I did that, but nobody likes me, I would have a hard time living with that. So I look back and see, as I get to the back nine, I see all the guys that, we were able to help.
I hate to tell you, there's only 3 holes left. We made the turn. We're on 16.
Oh, God. I shot an 82 yesterday, so I want to keep playing. But yeah, it's how you remembered. It's really hard. And look at us, Matt, right? We met a long time ago. Yep. We're still friends. That to me is worth everything. Like my kids will always say to me, Dad, how do you know this guy? How do you know that guy? How do you know this guy? I said, it's all about friendships. I said, everybody's going to cross paths. Some guy's going to be going up. Some guy's going. I remember Masai, the GM of Toronto, when he first started, and I got to know him, and we became friends. I said, come on over, watch our draft. And he came over and he couldn't believe like all the names on the board. And I haven't talked to Masai in a long time, but I ran into a guy the other day in New York, and he said, yeah, I'm good friends with Masai. I said, please tell him I said hello. Sends him a text. Masai sends a text back. Please tell JP hello. He was so good to me in Toronto. That's it. What can you ask for, right?
JP, I'm getting goosebumps talking to you. You're a good man. You're a good father, husband, Christian. It's an honor to interview you for the Rebound podcast, and I look forward to our next encounter.
Matt, great seeing you. I'm glad you're doing well. You're always one of the classy guys, and my buddies and I still talk about how great you were at Doug and you guys, and that's what it's all about, So God bless you and your family. Have good holidays, and
Thank
stay
you
in
so
touch.
much, JP.
Leadership is a learned behavior. You're a leader, whether you're a parent, a coach, a business owner, or a friend. We all lead in some way, shape, or form. Thanks for listening. I welcome any and all feedback. You can reach me at dohertycoaching.com.
This is Brian Anders, native Charlottean, recovering engineer, and seasoned entrepreneur. I am proud to support Matt Doherty and his podcast because even though he's not famous for his vertical leap, he truly knows how to rebound. We all know it takes community to get back on your feet and pursue that next opportunity. I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn at Brian K. Anders. That's Brian with an I, K. Anders, Anders, and I will see you online.
At Action Plus Ideas, your brand is our purpose. Elevating brands through premium merchandise and apparel is our expertise. With a legacy spanning over 30 years in Charlotte, we take pride in serving our community and beyond. With exceptional service, top-tier products, and always on-time delivery, we create lasting client relationships. As a prominent promotional products distributor, we offer competitive pricing, superior decoration, and inventive marketing solutions to make your brand stand out from the crowd. Contact Action Plus Ideas for more information at actionplusideas.com.